Hey y'all! Well, we're here for the subjective portion of our 300B tube shootout. And this has turned into a very interesting thing for me, listening to all these tubes, confirming what I had previously thought about certain tubes, and then doing some objective testing. That's the next video that, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that shows. That's going to be interesting to see how subtly different these tubes are that I could hear pretty big differences in. And so, anyway, let's get into the subjective shootout. And I'm going to start at my least favorite and work my way to the top. That it's almost a tie, but there probably is one that's a little more my favorite. And we'll get into that when we get there. So, first one on the bottom, the Gold Lion. This PX 300B, I think they call it. Here's the box. And honestly, I think this is the same tube as an Electro-Harmonix 300B. It sounds the same. This tube is just, if I had to listen to this tube, I wouldn't own a 300B amp. It sounds that bad. It's just muddy, lifeless, it doesn't have anything. There's no detail. It just smears all the music, and to me, overall, it's just a bad sounding tube. I initially was using its cousin, the Electro-Harmonix 300B tube, when I first built what turned into be this amp. Originally it had ED-core output transformers, and that was really the main difference as I switched to these ISO units, which are light years better. But anyway, even with the ED-core transformers, I was just not impressed at all with the way this 300B amp sound compared to, at the time I had my 6SQ7 EL34 as my other amp, and we redid that into the 5751 or 12AX7, whichever one you use in it, amp that is basically the same circuit using modern tubes. So again, if this is what you're going to be using in your 300B amp, don't bother. Just use an EL34 amp, anything else, KT88, those are just really bad sounding tubes. And so the next tube up in my subjective preference or lack thereof, sadly, was the Western Electric tubes. And I don't have it sitting out here. I've boxed it up to send back. Really good viewer sent me a pair of the new production A stock Western Electric tubes and the PS Vane clones of it, which are the WE 300B plus tubes, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the Western Electric tubes are just annoying. And I don't know whether it's like this amp and something about it just doesn't gel with those tubes. And I know somebody in the comments is going to say, I've got those tubes in a XYZ amp and they sound fantastic. You know, I'm glad you enjoy them. There is no way that I would buy those tubes. Not only, even if they were $400 for a pair, I wouldn't buy them or use them. And when somebody gave me a pair of them, I wouldn't listen to them. They're just annoying. They're brassy. They're harsh. The detail is sort of there, but like a trumpet or a saxophone, it makes a saxophone sound like a trumpet. I mean, everything's just this blaring, brassy, just fatiguing sound that is the opposite of why I would own a 300B amp. So, made in the USA. I know that's all great and everybody's cheering, all that stuff. But guys, just my recommendation is do not spend your money buying those tubes. And the other part that's even more concerning to me is now they're selling their B stock tubes, which are tubes that are just way out of spec. Because, I mean, these were A stock tubes, and they were still hotter than what a normal 300B, like any of the other 300B tubes. When I put them in this amp, almost every other tube that I put in here is pulling just within a milliamp of 75 milliamps, according to my little meter here, which we're just going by that. And put the Western Electrics in, and they were pulling 80 mils. And I let them burn in for 2 days, just running, and then played music through them for 10 hours before I, sat down to start doing my A/B testing. So they got what I consider plenty of burn-in time. And I know somebody's going to say, oh yeah, give them 500 hours and they start sounding great. These EML tubes sounded good out of the box, and they got better as they burned in, but within a day they were like what they were going to be, in my opinion. And so, yeah, Western Electric, thumbs down. I previously tested them or listened to them versus these Shootout tubes, these 300B-Zs in an R300 that had upgraded output transformers. We put ISO transformers on an R300, and I listened to those Western Electric tubes versus these Shoogats, and I didn't like them back then either. So that's 2 amplifiers that I've listened to those tubes in, just not a fan of. So then, the next little batch of them are kind of close, and a lot of it depends on the driver tube used. One of them is the PS Vane Horizon. It's actually a really good sounding tube with these black coated CV181s or with those 6H8Cs. I listened to a lot of them. I switched back and forth between those 2 driver tubes to just make sure that it wasn't some driver tube weirdness. And with those really mellow driver tubes that I normally use in a 300B amp, I like a real natural or neutral sounding driver tube. These are nice sounding tubes. They've got detail just out the wazoo, whatever term you want to use. I mean, first thing you notice when you put them in versus these other 2 on the bottom of the list is, oh, there's the detail. So they bring that to the table. So if you've got some speakers that are kind of mellow, those might bring out the detail that you're looking for. But almost it's equal, depending if you use the right driver tube, is this Shootout 300B-Z. I mean, it's a really nice sounding tube. It's a little on the mellow side, and it's not as detailed as this Horizon tube. But if you put the Horizon CV181, which is, China companies like calling them this, they're actually got the same heaters and all that as a 6S and 7. They're a direct drop-in. They just put them in a cooler looking bottle. And the original CV181s had a higher heater current, so you had to be careful about just dropping them in an amp. Most amps will handle them anyway, but anyway, getting way off topic there. The CV181 Horizons paired with these Shoogats sound a lot like these more mellow driver tubes and the Horizon output tube. Now, a problem does arrive when you use the Horizon driver tube with the Horizon 300B tube, at least in this amp and with their 300B tube. It's a little too much. It starts getting fatiguing, and it's not brassy and harsh like the Western Electric tubes, but it's still just almost a little too sharp, hard-edged sound that I just didn't care for. So, I don't know. It's interesting with their 2A3 tube, the Horizon 6 SL7 in the 2A3 amp, those sound great just as a whole set, and they're not too much. But in my 300B amp with their driver and their output, I don't recommend that. So use something like that 6H8C, that cheap Russian copy or version of a 6S and 7 sounds great. I've got some Sylvania tall bottle with the bottom getter things. They sound really nice with the Horizon Tube too. I prefer these a little more than the Sylvanias even. They've got a little bit of more richness to the sound, but we're not here to review driver tubes. But it's hard to not talk about the driver tube because they do interact with the output tubes. So next up the ladder, surprisingly to me, was the PS Vane WE300B Plus tubes. Now, Melody from PS Vane sent me an email. She saw me talking about that. It's a tube they designed about 10 years ago that was their like Halo tube, the top of the line product. And it's kind of funny, the language on the tube and stuff is like, for those who win in life or something is printed on the tube. It's anyway, I was surprised how good they sounded. I don't know why I'm surprised, but they really sound good. And now that we're in this kind of top tier of tubes, I don't feel that there's a whole lot of tonality difference. They all seem to have like good bass, nice, smooth, rich mid-range. The top end was just right, sparkly enough without being fatiguing. And so the difference, I feel like when you get into these higher end tubes, is more like the sound stage and what does the environment feel like when you're listening to these tubes. And that was why that WE300B PS Vane tube ended up in that place in the order, was it had a narrower sound stage. And I feel like the tonality kind of made up for that narrower sound stage. But if you're a real soundstage person, just get these Horizon tubes. They've got a nice sound stage. They just don't quite have the richness in the mid-range that 300B from PS Vane, the older WE. And I think they still have them for sale, or you can find them for sale. So, that said, the next one we had on our list is the PS Vane Summit. And this tube is so open and it sounds almost like you're outdoors. And I don't want to say it's a one-trick pony, but there's certain types of music that it just doesn't lend itself to. And other things, it sounds just unbelievable. Like, I listened to Frampton Comes Alive, very well-known album that was a live concert, and you feel like you're there. You feel like you're just in some outdoor stadium with, the speakers and stuff 100 yards away, and you just get this whole, it's almost kind of a reverb kind of a sound to the tube. It's hard to describe, but it's very obvious when you listen to it compared to, those earlier tubes at the WE300B pluses or these EML tubes. It's just, again, it's not fatiguing. It's not like it's all super sparkly on the top end, but it does have that just really nice open sound. Only reason I've got it in second place is I'm not sure I would buy them if that was the only tube I was going to own. Because there are certain kinds of music that it just doesn't really shine at. And if you're looking for a different tube, let's say you've got some of these EMLs or you've got some, other kind of 300B tubes that you really love, and you wanted to get something that was a little different flavor but that's still a real top shelf kind of tube, get a pair of these Summit tubes and try them out. They definitely are a tube that's in my rotation, but I know sometimes when I put on an album and it's kind of like, I don't know, I'll go back to my mainstay tubes, which are my number one pick. And again, it's almost like these Summit tubes are kind of like a side grade. You know what I'm saying? They really do certain things really great. But if I had to pick one tube to buy, it would be these solid plate EML 300Bs. So I haven't listened to any of EML's other tubes. I know they have some like mesh plate. They got some 300B 2.5s. They've got, the XLS that you can run at hotter currents. I just worked on a friend's amp that needed they call them a 520B, which is like a super high current 300B variant. But these are their most affordable 300B tubes. It's one of the reasons I got them. And I just, standard plate, 300Bs that you can run at normal 300B operating conditions sounded like a good fit for me. And they're not cheap. I'll put a link below. I'm not going to even guess what they are today with the current market shipping tariff, whatever. I don't know how all that's impacting this. I'm glad I got them when I did, which is about a year ago. And again, right out of the box, I switched from the Shoogies to these, and it was like, oh, this is why people like 300B amps. This is unbelievable. I mean, the detail and the crispness and just, they were just on point. Now, I originally was running these Shoogie 300B-Z tubes with a more kind of crisp driver tube, and I had to back down to these that I happen to have a pair of those up in my tube stash upstairs, and I started rolling. It's like, this is nice. It's a little fatiguing, and it was the driver tube combo. So you are going to have to kind of roll some driver tubes to figure out what works best with your speakers too. I've got quad S2s with a ribbon tweeter, and so they are very articulate, and so I do have to be careful that the tube combo that I use isn't also super articulate, because then it can become a little just, I call it ice pick in the ear kind of a thing. You'll hit that note, it's kind of like, ooh, it needs the edge rolled off a little bit. And can't recommend these highly enough. They're super well made. They've got a long warranty. They've been around for a long time. Not saying that some of these other tubes aren't equally reliable. I've had these Shoogie 300B-Z tubes for a long time, and they've got a zillion hours on them, and they sound just as good as when I put them in. So one of the tricks that I did do in this amp, and I recommend if you build a 300B amp with DC heaters you do this, is I counter wired the tube sockets. And by that I mean on one tube socket, like the positive, it's got positive and negative on the heaters, and then on the other one I've got positive negative, so that every few months I can swap the tubes and the polarity of the heaters get reversed. And I've read, don't have a lot of experience, but I've read this in multiple places, that if you run the same DC through a 300B tube for a long time, it can erode or wear out one end of the filament, and then the other one's just almost like new. And so by rotating the tubes, when you have the counter-wired DC heaters, it gets all the goodie out of them. And really, that's kind of it for the subjective review. I hope this was helpful. I know I try not to use too much, calling something chocolatey or whatever, but it's hard to describe sound and come up with adjectives that don't sound like a wine tasting when you're trying to describe what something sounds like. And these tubes do sound very different. And I wish I could have given the Western Electric tubes a better rating, but sadly, there may be another production run of them that do sound great. And I don't know the history to know like when they may have changed the way they were making them, or maybe the early reproduction or reissues were better and then they changed something. I don't know. But the ones I was given did not sound good. And like I said, I tried another pair a couple of years ago in a totally different amp, had these same really high-end transformers, and yeah, that didn't sound good either. So, and I will say this is a very revealing amp with these ISO Tango. These are the FC30-3.5 S2s, I think they're called, that are the newest version of their 300B output transformers. That when I switched from Edcore to these, that was another eye-opener on how important quality output transformers are. And it's why I've been doing different things with output transformers since then, once I realized how critical that is to the sound. So I think that's going to wrap up the subjective part of my 300B tube shootout. And I intentionally listened to all these tubes before I tested them, because I didn't want seeing something on the audio analyzer suite or the scope or something to, and change my subjective opinion, because it's very easily to come into something like this with confirmation bias. And if anything, my bias coming into this was expecting those new production Western electric tubes to be like the gold standard, and all these other tubes were trying to find a position under it. And the only tube that lost to them was this Gold Lion 300B. Now, I do at some point want to try the JJ 300B tubes for a budget tube choice. And I've heard people say they sound really good. I really like their EL34 tubes. I've compared their EL34 tubes to a dozen different EL34 KT77 6A7 variants, and I always end up going back to the EL34L from JJ for my other amp. So could be their 300B tubes really good. And I've also never tried like their 6SM7 or 6SL7s. So I may give those a shot, because I like their small 9-pin driver tubes. They also sound really good. So we'll have that for another day. At least we know what the King of the Hill is to compare it to. And again, I've boxed up the Western Electric tubes and those PS Vane copies. The WE300B Plus, I think they call them. I've got those boxed up to head back. Thanks again for trusting me with your expensive tubes to use for this review. Thanks to all you subscribers and people that watch my channel. I really appreciate all you guys. Thanks to you Patreon supporters, people that are members of the channel too. That's really fun and helpful. Just a little extra income for me to be able to go out and, hey, let's go buy some JJ tubes, knowing that if I make a video about it and it's popular, that'll help offset some of the costs of doing these reviews for you guys. So I have also finished up doing the objective review, which didn't change my opinion subjectively about these tubes, seeing the results. And I'm not going to spoil what those are like compared to my subjective reviews, just have to see what that looks like. You'll have to watch that video, and that's coming up soon. So, again, thanks to you guys for all your support, and until that video, have a nice day.